Funny how a room full of strangers can decide your worth in under 10 seconds. The spotlight burned white against Emily Carter's face as she stepped onto the stage, the polished floor reflecting every careful step she took in her modest heels, the kind you buy when bills come before vanity, and somewhere in the audience, a glass clinked against another, laughter already rising before a single word had been exchanged, as if the verdict had been written long before she arrived. Ryan Blake leaned back in his chair, one arm draped casually over the desk, the kind of effortless confidence built on years of being untouchable, his smile sharp enough to cut through the silence he pretended to control, and when he finally leaned forward, fingers tapping lightly against his cue cards, the room quieted not out of respect, but anticipation. "Emily Carter," he said, drawing her name out just long enough to make it feel like a setup instead of an introduction, his eyes scanning her from head to toe, not missing the simplicity of her dress, the absence of anything flashy. The quiet evidence of a life rebuilt piece by piece. A ripple of murmurs passed through the audience. "Single mom, right?" he added, tilting his head slightly, the question already laced with implication. The camera shifted closer, catching the smallest movement in her hand as it brushed the microphone, a faint tremor that lasted less than a second before stillness returned, like a wave deciding not to crash. "Tell me," Ryan continued, voice smooth but edged, "what's it like trying to keep up in a world that clearly moved on without you?" A few people laughed, not loudly, but enough to fill the space, enough to make it echo. Emily didn't answer. Not immediately. Her eyes lifted, not to Ryan, but past him, toward the rows of faces half-lit in shadow, strangers who had already decided who she was. The silence stretched longer than expected, and for the first time, something flickered, brief, almost imperceptible, across Ryan's expression. Because she wasn't breaking. She wasn't shrinking. She was just watching. And somehow, that made the room feel different. The silence did not break, it thickened, stretching across the stage until even the audience shifted in their seats, unsure whether to laugh again or wait for something they could not yet name, and Emily Carter finally lowered her gaze from the crowd to the microphone in her hand, her fingers no longer trembling, her grip steady now as if whatever storm had passed through her had already settled somewhere deep and unreachable, and when she spoke, her voice was not loud, but it carried, clear and even, the kind that did not ask for permission to be heard. "I did not realize the world was something you could fall behind on," she said, her tone almost thoughtful, not defensive, not sharp, just honest enough to feel out of place in a room built on performance, and a few scattered chuckles rose again, weaker this time, uncertain, because she had not given them anything to laugh at. Ryan Blake leaned forward slightly, his smile tightening, adjusting his posture as if reclaiming control meant leaning closer to it, his fingers tapping once more against the cards in his hand, faster now, less rhythmic. "Come on," he said, letting out a light breath that almost sounded like a laugh. "You have got to admit, raising a kid alone, working God knows how many hours a week, trying to stay afloat, that is not exactly the dream people picture, is it?" A couple of heads nodded in the crowd, encouraged by his tone, by the permission to agree. Emily's eyes lifted again, this time meeting his directly, and for a fraction of a second, something shifted in the air, subtle but undeniable, like a current running beneath still water. "Dreams change," she replied, her lips forming the words without hesitation, and there was no trace of apology in them. The stage lights reflected softly against her face, revealing details the camera had not caught before, the quiet confidence in the way she stood, the absence of urgency, as if she was not there to defend herself, but simply to exist without explanation. Somewhere off stage, a producer's voice crackled faintly through a headset, too low for the audience to hear, but enough for Ryan to glance briefly to the side, irritation flickering across his expression before he masked it again with that same practiced grin. He shifted in his chair, straightening his jacket, preparing his next question, one sharper, one that would land, because this was how it always went. He pushed, they cracked, the audience laughed, and the show moved on. But Emily did not look like someone about to crack. She looked like someone who had already survived everything this room could offer, and that made something unfamiliar settle into the edges of the moment. Something quiet, something patient, something that had not yet revealed itself, but was already changing the way the room breathed. Ryan Blake let out a short laugh, but it did not land the way he expected. It echoed instead, hollow against a room that had grown just slightly too quiet, and he leaned back again as if distance could restore the balance he was used to controlling. His fingers sliding the cue cards aside like he no longer needed them, like improvisation was his strength. But there was a flicker in his eyes now, something calculating, something searching for the exact angle that would bring the moment back. Under his command. Dreams change, he repeated, nodding slowly, his tone lighter, almost amused, but thinner than before, stretched across something he could not quite read. That sounds like something people say when things do not exactly go according to plan. A few people in the audience responded with quiet agreement, more out of habit than conviction, their earlier confidence softening into curiosity as they watched the exchange unfold without the expected collapse. Emily did not move from where she stood, her posture relaxed, shoulders steady, her gaze unwavering as it held his, and for a brief second, the studio lights seemed less harsh against her, as if they had adjusted to her presence instead of exposing it. Or maybe, she said, her voice calm, measured, it is something people say when they stop living someone else's version of it. The words settled into the room with a weight that did not demand attention, but refused to disappear, and even those who had been smiling moments ago found themselves still, their expressions caught between reaction and reconsideration. Ryan's joy tightened almost imperceptibly before he forced another smile, tilting his head as if amused, though his eyes flickered again toward the side stage, toward the producers whose movements had become less casual, more alert, as if something unplanned was unfolding just beyond the script. Well, he said, adjusting his cuff with deliberate care, buying himself a second, I suppose not everyone gets the luxury of rewriting their story. His tone sharpened on the last word, subtle but intentional, the kind of push designed to corner, to provoke something emotional, something raw enough to regain control of the narrative. But Emily only exhaled softly, almost like a quiet laugh that never fully formed, and for the first time, there was the faintest hint of something else in her expression, not anger, not hurt, but recognition, as if she had heard this line before. Long before this stage, long before this audience, and had already decided what it was worth. No, she said gently, her eyes steady, some of us just build a better one. And somewhere behind the cameras, a voice rose again through a headset, sharper this time, urgent enough that Ryan could not ignore it completely, his attention splitting for a fraction of a second, and in that fraction, the room shifted again, not loudly. Not dramatically, but enough to feel, like the first second before a storm breaks, when everything looks the same, but nothing is. The air in the studio did not return to normal after her words. It hovered in that fragile space where something invisible had already shifted, and Ryan Blake felt it before he understood it, the way the audience leaned in instead of laughing. The way the silence no longer worked in his favor, and he cleared his throat lightly, forcing a small chuckle as he reached for a different angle, something safer, something that would bring the room back to him. Well, Emily, he said, his voice smoother now, carefully measured, I have to ask, what exactly are you building now? Because from where most people are sitting, it looks like you are still trying to catch up. A few heads turned, some nodding again, relieved to be given direction, to be told how to interpret her, but the energy behind it felt thinner, like an echo instead of a reaction. Emily did not respond right away, her eyes drifting for a brief moment, not toward the audience this time, but somewhere farther, somewhere beyond the stage lights, and for the first time, the camera caught a flicker of something softer, not weakness, but memory. As if the noise around her had faded into something distant. A small apartment kitchen, barely big enough for two, early morning light slipping through thin blinds, the sound of a coffee maker humming while a child's backpack rested against the wall, and her hands moving quickly, efficiently, tying shoelaces, checking homework, pouring cereal, every motion practiced, every second accounted for, because time had once been something she could not afford to waste. The memory passed as quickly as it came, and when her focus returned, it carried something steadier, something grounded. "I am not catching up," she said quietly, her voice steady enough to settle the room again. "I am exactly where I decided to be." The words did not rise, they did not push, they simply existed, and that made them harder to dismiss. Ryan's smile held, but only just, the corners tightening as he shifted slightly in his seat, his fingers brushing the edge of the desk, tapping once, then stopping, as if even he could feel that repeating the same rhythm would not work anymore. Behind the cameras, movement picked up again, subtle but urgent, a producer stepping closer, another voice cutting through a headset with sharper instructions, and for a split second, Ryan's attention slipped, his eyes darting sideways before snapping back. And that was when he noticed it, not something she said, but something about her, the way she stood, the way she did not seem out of place under the lights, as if this stage was not new to her, as if this was not the first time she had been seen by an audience, and the realization did not fully form, not yet, but it lingered, quiet and unsettling, like a question he had not thought to ask until it was already too late to ignore. Ryan Blake let the silence sit for half a second too long before forcing a small smile back into place, the kind that usually reset the room, but this time it felt thinner, like something stretched past its limit, and he shifted forward again, fingers lacing together on the desk, as if grounding himself in a routine he had never questioned before. "Exactly where you decided to be," he repeated, nodding slowly, but there was a slight edge now, something probing beneath the calm surface, as if he was no longer entirely certain what he was dealing with. "That sounds intentional." A few quiet laughs followed, hesitant, almost checking if it was still safe to respond that way. Emily did not react to them. Her attention had already moved past the moment, not dismissing it, but not holding on to it either, like someone who had learned the difference between noise and meaning. In the front rows, a subtle shift began, people leaning closer, not for entertainment anymore, but for understanding, drawn in by something they could not easily define. Ryan noticed it too, the way the room was no longer following his lead as quickly, and for a brief second, he glanced again toward the side stage, where a producer stood unusually still, one hand pressed against a headset, listening, watching, waiting. The signal did not come. "Not yet. So let me ask you this," Ryan continued, adjusting his tone again, softer now, almost curious, though the calculation had not disappeared. "Do you ever wish things had gone differently, that maybe you would not have had to rebuild everything from scratch?" The question lingered longer than the others, not because it was sharper, but because it was quieter, almost personal, and for the first time, the audience did not react at all, as if they sensed something beneath it that did not belong to the show. Emily's gaze lowered briefly, not in hesitation, but in thought, her fingers brushing lightly against the microphone as if grounding herself in the present before answering. Another memory surfaced, not chaotic, not painful, but precise, a late night at a small wooden table, a single lamp casting a warm circle of light, stacks of paperwork spread in front of her, numbers, contracts, notes written in careful handwriting. Her child asleep in the next room, the soft hum of the refrigerator the only sound, and her eyes focused, not tired, not defeated, but determined in a way that did not need to be seen to exist. She had built something there, quietly, piece by piece, without anyone asking, without anyone noticing. The moment passed, and when she looked up again, there was no weight left in it, only clarity. "No," she said simply, her voice steady, unshaken, "because starting over taught me who I was building for." The answer did not rise, it settled, and somewhere behind the cameras, a different kind of movement began, faster now, more deliberate, as if something had just clicked into place that could not be undone, and Ryan felt it before he understood it. The faintest crack in the control he had always assumed was his. The words did not echo, they settled, heavy in a way that made the studio feel smaller, and Ryan Blake felt the shift before he could mask it, his fingers pressing flat against the desk now instead of tapping. his posture tightening just enough to betray the control he was trying to maintain, and for a brief second, he did not speak, which in his world was the first sign something had gone off script. The audience noticed it too, the pause stretching longer than comfort allowed, their attention no longer drifting but fixed, waiting, not for entertainment, but for resolution. Ryan cleared his throat, a quiet sound that carried farther than it should have, and forced a smile that did not quite reach his eyes. "That is admirable," he said, choosing the word carefully as if placing it between them would restore balance, but it only hung there, incomplete, unable to anchor the moment the way his words usually did. His gaze flickered again, this time longer, toward the side stage, where movement had become impossible to ignore, a producer stepping forward, whispering urgently into a headset, another figure arriving beside them, composed, still, watching the stage with a focus that did not belong to a casual observer. Ryan's attention snapped back, but something had already registered, something subtle but persistent, like a detail that refused to be dismissed once noticed. Emily stood exactly as she had before, unchanged, unaffected by the shifting tension around her, her presence steady in a way that no longer felt accidental, and for the first time, Ryan looked at her not as a guest, not as a segment, but as a variable he had not accounted for. "You speak like someone who planned all of this," he said, the question slipping out before he could soften it, his tone quieter now, less performative, edged with something closer to curiosity than control. The room held its breath again, the kind of silence that no longer belonged to him. Emily's lips curved slightly, not into a smile, but into something knowing, something that suggested the answer existed long before the question was asked. "Not everything," she replied, her voice calm, grounded, but enough. The simplicity of it did not explain anything, and somehow, that made it heavier. Behind the cameras, a signal was finally given, a subtle nod, a shift in stance, and the man who had been standing in the shadows began to move, not rushed, not announced, just a quiet step forward into the edge of the light, and though no one had introduced him. The energy in the room changed instantly, like the moment before a name is spoken that everyone is about to recognize, even if they do not yet know why. The movement was subtle, almost too quiet to notice at first, but the room felt it before it saw it. A shift in attention that pulled every gaze toward the edge of the stage where a man stepped forward with a kind of composure that did not need introduction. His presence carrying weight not through volume, but through certainty, and the closer he moved into the light, the more the atmosphere changed, like a silent agreement passing through the audience that something important had just entered the frame. Ryan Blake followed the motion instinctively, his eyes narrowing slightly as he tried to place the face, the posture, the unmistakable confidence that did not belong to a guest or a staff member, and for a brief second, his expression faltered, not fully. Not enough for most to catch, but enough to break the rhythm he had been holding onto since the beginning. The producers behind the cameras were no longer whispering. They were watching, still and alert, as if whatever was about to happen was no longer theirs to control. Emily did not turn immediately. She did not rush to acknowledge the presence behind her, as if she had been expecting it all along, and when she finally shifted her gaze slightly to the side, it was not in surprise, but in quiet recognition. The man stopped just short of the stage, close enough for the light to reveal his features clearly now, tailored suit, measured steps, eyes that moved once across the room before settling, not on Ryan, but on Emily, steady and familiar. A murmur spread through the audience, low and uncertain, people leaning toward one another, searching their memory for a name they felt they should know, while Ryan remained still, his mind catching up slower than the moment demanded, his fingers curling slightly against the desk as something unspoken pressed in. "I think," Ryan began, forcing a small, controlled smile back into place, though his voice carried a slight strain now, "we have an unexpected guest." The words felt lighter than the weight of the situation, as if he was trying to frame it into something manageable, something he could still guide. The man did not respond immediately, his attention still on Emily, and then, with a calm that cut through the tension without effort, he took one final step forward. The distance between them closed without drama, without announcement, and Emily's hand lifted slightly, not reaching, not signaling, just present, and in that small movement, something became undeniable, something the room could feel even before it was named. And Ryan saw it then, not clearly, not completely, but enough for a quiet, unwelcome realization to begin forming at the edges of his control, something he had missed from the very beginning, something that was already too late to undo. The moment did not explode, it unfolded, slow and precise, like something inevitable finally stepping into the light, and as the man reached Emily's side, the distance between who she appeared to be and who she truly was began to collapse without a single word needing to explain it. Ryan Blake straightened in his seat, his smile fading into something tighter, something uncertain, his eyes locked onto the figure now standing just within the glow of the stage lights, recognition arriving not all at once, but in fragments that refused to be ignored. The tailored suit, the calm posture, the quiet authority that did not ask for attention yet commanded it anyway, and then the final piece settled into place, not through introduction, but through the reaction it triggered around him. A producer's voice cut sharply through his earpiece, no longer controlled, no longer subtle, words rushing too fast for composure, and Ryan's expression shifted before he could stop it, the confidence slipping just enough to reveal what sat beneath it. The audience felt it instantly, the murmur growing into something heavier, something aware, as phones lowered and eyes fixed forward, sensing that the narrative they had been given was no longer accurate. The man turned slightly, just enough to face Ryan now, his gaze steady, not confrontational, not aggressive, but unshakably certain, and when he finally spoke, his voice carried without effort, clear and measured. "You invited her here to tell a story," he said, each word placed with intention, "but you never asked who is writing it." The sentence did not raise in volume, but it landed with weight, and the silence that followed was no longer empty, it was filled with realization. Ryan opened his mouth slightly, as if to respond, but no words came, his mind racing to catch up to something that had already moved beyond him. Emily remained still beside him, her presence unchanged, her composure untouched by the shift unfolding around her, and then, without ceremony, without emphasis, the man reached out, his hand finding hers with a familiarity that did not need explanation. It was a simple gesture, almost invisible in its restraint, but it carried more meaning than anything that had been said on that stage. A name finally surfaced in the room, whispered at first, then recognized, passing through the audience like a current, and Ryan heard it, felt it, understood it all at once, the connection, the status, the reality he had failed to see, and in that moment, the control he had built his presence on slipped completely, replaced by something colder, something irreversible. He had not misjudged a guest. He had misjudged the entire story. And now, standing under the same lights he once controlled, he realized what the silence meant, not hesitation, not weakness, but certainty, the kind that did not need to prove itself because it already had, long before he ever asked the first question. No one clapped, not at first, because the moment did not ask for applause, it demanded understanding, and the weight of it settled across the room in a silence that felt final, the kind that comes when something cannot be undone. Ryan Blake sat motionless behind his desk, the cards in front of him now meaningless, his carefully constructed presence reduced to something smaller, something uncertain, and for the first time since the lights came on, he had nothing to say. The name continued to move through the audience in hushed recognition, no longer a question, no longer a rumor, but a fact that rewrote everything they thought they knew, and Emily Carter stood in the center of it without changing a single thing about herself. Her posture steady, her expression calm, as if none of this was new to her, as if this was simply the moment catching up to the truth she had been carrying all along. The man beside her did not speak again, he did not need to, his presence alone had already shifted the balance, already answered the question that Ryan had tried to frame from the beginning, and the hand he held remained gentle, certain, not for display, but for acknowledgement. Emily turned her head slightly, her gaze finally settling on Ryan, not with anger, not with triumph, but with something far quieter, something that carried no need for reaction, and when she spoke, her voice did not rise above the silence, it moved through it. "You asked what it feels like," she said, each word measured, unhurried, to be left behind. The room held its breath again, not out of tension, but out of recognition. "It feels like learning to walk forward without asking anyone to follow." There was no emphasis, no performance, just truth placed where it belonged, and Ryan felt it. Land in a way no audience ever had, not as entertainment, but as consequence. Emily did not wait for a response. She did not look back to see what expression crossed his face, because whatever realization had reached him had come too late to matter, and with a quiet shift, she stepped away from the center of the stage, her hand still in his. Moving not with urgency, but with certainty, the kind that does not question where it is going because it already knows. The lights remained bright, the cameras still rolling, but the story had already ended, not with a confrontation, not with a victory declared, but with something far more lasting. A presence that did not need to prove itself because it had already become undeniable, and as the distance between her and the stage grew, the silence she left behind said more than anything that had been spoken, because she did not come back to be seen. She came back because she no longer needed to be.